Hello, everyone, and welcome to the First Class Lacrosse podcast. My name is Deemer, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Dunn. We're honored to welcome one of the most influential figures in women's lacrosse, Loyola Maryland head coach Jen Adams. Coach Adams is entering her 18th season at the helm of the Greyhounds and is the all-time winningest coach in program history. During her tenure, Loyola has become the gold standard in the Patriot League, winning 11 straight regular season titles, 8 Patriot League championships, and earning 13 NCAA tournament appearances and extending an incredible 93-game regular season conference winning streak. Her impact goes far beyond team success. Under Coach Adams, Loyola has produced All-Americans, a Tewarton finalist, and multiple record breakers, all while maintaining an elite academic standard. Her teams have consistently ranked among the best in the country in the classroom, and she's guided generations of student athletes who excel on and off the field. Many former players are now also in the coaching ranks themselves. And then there's her resume in the sport itself. Jen is a member of multiple Hall of Fames, most recently the inaugural Lacrosse Australia Hall of Fame class, and one of the most decorated players in the history of the game. She's a 4-time national champion at Maryland, the first ever Tewarton Trophy winner, and a legend on the international stage with the Australian national team. In 2005, she captained Team Australia to gold with 7 points in the finals. And with that, Coach, we're honored to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deemer. That stuff's all very uncomfortable, but I appreciate you having me on.
Well, definitely do. It's. I know sometimes the intros can be long, but much deserved, and we're really excited to talk about your journey today and what's gotten you to this point.
Cool. Sounds good.
Awesome, Jen. Yeah, we're excited to have you. First question, kind of diving into the Australia piece off the start. Kind of wondering if you could set the stage. What was it like growing up in Australia and getting introduced to lacrosse there?
Yeah, I feel so incredibly fortunate to have grown up, especially playing sport in Australia. I think we have a really healthy culture and introduction to sport at a young age. And the way it's run in these club settings and systems where it's really family based and an opportunity to, grow and develop surrounded by not just your age group, but people outside your age group, as well as being surrounded by different genders, which I'll touch on in a second. But I grew up playing a lot of different sports. It's part of the Australian culture in and of itself is to dive in and play a lot of different sports and do a lot of different things as a kid. And so I was most happy when I was out on a field or doing something where I was active and expending energy. And luckily for me, I've got an older sister who I literally followed in her footsteps. What she did, I did. And luckily that led her onto the lacrosse field and not into like ballet or something. But I followed her onto the lacrosse field at a young age of like 8, trying it out at a clinic, and fell in love instantly with lacrosse. But played a lot of different sports growing up, so kind of moved in that direction. And then ended up playing in the club, the greatest club in Australia, the Brighton Lacrosse Club in South Australia. So many great players coming out of there. Sonia Lamonica, who's at Virginia, Hannah Nilsson at Michigan, incredible players. And also all have come out of the same club, which is, I think, a really cool story. We were all really lucky to be part of that. But the club system, I think, is something special and a part of what we all experienced. You're out there, watching the guys play, watching the girls play, just drawing from so many different inspirations. And, I remember being out on the field pre-watching, you've got all these options at fields or walls, people doing wall ball. I remember Mark Mangan, who was a player, played over in the States, and he was from the Brighton Lacrosse Club. He'd been back playing. And I remember sitting before a practice and watching him hit a 2x4. That's what he chose as his wall, and just watching him consistently drill it and hit it. And he walked away and left, and I was like, I'm gonna do that, and missed about 100 times before I got it down. But it's that kind of, I think, exposure that really led me to loving the game and being a part of it. And I think it has been the secret to success for a lot of Australians coming over.
It's really cool to hear about. And we had Hannah on last season, and she was touching on some of that. I'd love to hear, you kind of referenced it, the men's and the women's component to the club, but also, maybe even expanding on your perspective on the different age groups, having older players, younger players, and, what your perspective on how that helped you as well.
Yeah, and I didn't know any differently. We'd show up to a Saturday, typically is when we'd play our club game. So you'd practice twice a week. You'd show up and you'd play on a Saturday, and I'd play in my age group, which was, at junior division. So say I was in the, under 15s, I would play an under 15 game, an under 18 game, and then I'd go play in a senior game later that day. So the senior game would be mixed, and we'd be going up against women that were on the Australian national team at the time, the some of the best players that the sport had seen. And you figure out and you learn how to handle your own very quickly. But you also learn that, like, age isn't everything on a lacrosse field. And I think that's something I've really brought into my coaching too. But separating, saying someone's a veteran cell, they get they got the experience, or they get the priority, isn't something that was brought to me in my culture. It was come in and, like, earn your spot and play against these women and grow some thick skin and learn how to take the hits and the falls and figure it out really quickly. But I also was able to be on a field and learn so much from those older players, people that I really respect and still to this day hold as really big mentors in my game. And I was able to be on a field playing with and against them, and that's rare as a young kid. So again, just a side of Australian lacrosse that's I think really unique and really cool.
So Jen, the club model there, was Brighton Lacrosse Club traveling around to play other clubs? Was that there's a ton of local talent there? How did that work?
So you just play rival clubs within your state. So I'm from Adelaide, South Australia. So we would just play on Saturdays from the local clubs that are around. So you didn't really travel. When you traveled, that was when you made a state team. So I would go to represent, say, South Australia against other states in Australia. Again, it was localized. A lot of these people were your friends off the field, but then hitting the field on a Saturday become your biggest enemies and competitors. But yeah, again, it's like you would play all those games on a Saturday, and then you'd all go back to the clubhouse on that Saturday night. All the families would be there. You'd eat a meal together, and they'd do what's called presentations at home, where they would read out, who won the games of the day and, who scored goals, and they'd name best and fairest, the top three players from the field. And just a really, really, really cool experience. I think back so fondly on my childhood and my sport experience that I had growing up at home in Australia.
It's cool to hear because I think it really touches on a lot of the essence of sport and why people love sport. And I think also with even how the youth sports model in America has evolved, where it can steer away from that, and it's like this really hard balance that I think a lot of people in all youth sports are undergoing. But I guess, tying that into then where your journey led to, at what point did you start thinking about, coming to America to play college lacrosse? How did that unfold for you?
Yeah, I'd seen and heard of other people, from Australia. Sarah Forbes, Sasha Newmarch had been at Maryland, the University of Maryland, and then, like, guys from our program, I mentioned Mark Mangan had traveled over, played community college, and then ended up at Adelphi on Long Island. And to us, they're these players that went away and got to go to America and go to college and play lacrosse. So it was definitely something we knew about. I was really lucky. I made my under 19, the inaugural under 19 Australian team. Was the first World Cup for under 19s was held at Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania in 1995. And I was really lucky to make that team. I was quite young at the time. I was 14 when I made the team, turned 15, literally over in the States on the plane ride home. So very young by that stretch. But again, being able to come over to the States, get some exposure. We actually stayed at the University of Maryland. We played a local club team, post-collegiate club team. And I believe that was the first place where, I got eyes on me by Gary Gate and Cindy Timshaw, and was just so fortunate that they got to see me play. And, post that World Cup, it was like, a lot of players getting a lot of interest in a lot of different schools. Temple at the time, Loyola, and Maryland were reaching out to a lot of people. And I was just crossing my fingers and hoping that maybe one day that would be my call up. And I was really lucky that Gary and Cindy saw something in me, and when that time came, reached out. I had one phone call. It was from the University of Maryland, one program that had shown that interest. And I was like, I guess I'll come to the States and play for you. Little did I know I'm landing on, the most prolific program in women's lacrosse history and getting coached by the most incredible, phenomenal coaches that I could have ever asked for. So it was a perfect storm for me, to be quite honest.
It's cool to hear how exciting the opportunity was to go play in the States, because the way I see it, that's a huge leap, flying across the country, flying across the world to a whole new continent to play lacrosse in a state maybe you've been to one time before. I'm wondering what that change was like for you arriving on campus at Maryland from a lacrosse playing standpoint, but also just a cultural or just a lifestyle change.
Yeah, and this is where I'm glad we don't get my teammates on the phone. I think everyone was like, "Oh, there's this Aussie supposed to be coming over. She's great." I remember, our first team conditioning, being running the first couple and being like, "Yeah, I'm done." And they're like, "You got to keep running. It's not a personal choice thing here." I was like, "Oh, okay." It was a culture shock. I didn't know how to do my own wash. I didn't know how to do anything. I think I learned a lot. I grew up very quickly, and I think that is something that, if you're gonna go to the other side of the world, I'm really close with my family, really tight knit. So it was a difficult thing, but I think you grow up quickly. And I think that's what college is all about, is you become a young adult, you learn what you want to do and who you want to be there. And I had to do that very quickly in that first year. I was so lucky. The parents, the teammates that I had, the coaches, the support system, that they just took me in. And I ended up being one of the luckiest people alive. I get to pick and choose where I went on holidays and, where I wanted to go in the country. But I really was adopted by the University of Maryland and those parents and players. And I was just so lucky that, for as great as they all were on the field, those players, they were even better off the field and really making me, comfortable and allowing me that ability to be away from family and make it work, because it is tough. It is a very difficult thing to do. And I don't want to say you're lonely, but it is hard to be away from your family that far, where you can't just on a whim know you could get home quickly. You're looking at a couple of days travel. So I just know I was in the right place, because that was so easy for me.
Yeah, it makes me reflect on my freshman year of college, and again, not nearly the distance from home and some of that adjustment, but I remember that being a really difficult time for myself too, to get comfortable. And you know could have been easy to say, hey, maybe I'll move closer to home, or maybe I'll transfer. Nowadays it's easier to transfer than ever. So even for you, as you reflect on that, were there specific people or conversations that they had to convince you, no, you were meant to be here? Or was it just more the collective? Anything that sticks out in your mind on that?
I mean, I do know you're going to have those moments. I know after my freshman year going, I came over actually in January of my freshman year. So I missed a whole fall. So I came in for a preseason and, went a whole year before I went back home again, a year and a half technically. So I went back home that next Christmas, and, as a sophomore, that you're going home and it's this feeling of reattaching back. And as much as I was loving the lacrosse and loving my experience, I know going home for the first time, it was like, do I want to go back there? I think a lot of people have it. You finally get back to where you feel, you're around your people again and around your family and around everything you were about growing up. And it's hard to then disattach, cut that cord again and head back. So I do know my sophomore year, I remember vividly, we used to actually get real mail, handwritten mail. And I got a card from Christy Jenkins at the time. She was a junior, and it was just a note saying I get how hard it is. I can imagine how difficult it's going to be to come back, but we've got you here, come back and let's take a run for another national championship, and we're your people and we'll look after you. And then you can go back again next year. And I remember getting that card and being yeah, it's just kind of that push maybe that you needed. But I think it's the difficult part of being a foreigner over here. And you're always, once you actually make the journey and you've done it once, now your foot is always half in, half out. No matter where you are, you feel like you're missing out on something. And I am a kind of FOMO type person. So like I'm home in Australia, I'm constantly feel like I'm missing out on whatever's going on in the States. And I'm here in the States and I'm constantly feeling like I'm missing out on what's going on in Australia. So you put yourself in a difficult position because for the rest of life, I'm going to feel like I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that being a hard position. Now, you did come over to a Maryland team that went on to win 4 national championships, which is insane. And I'm curious, what do you think separated those Maryland teams from everyone else, like on a daily basis? And maybe it was hard to see at the time, but in hindsight, what stands out about those teams who come over to a generational run from that program?
And I think it's interesting, like you said, it might be hard to see at the time. And I know it took distance for me to look back and be like, holy smokes, we won 4 national championships. How hard that is. I know in probably even 5 years out, it didn't feel like that. It was like, yeah, we won 4 national championships. That's what we did. And that not to sound cocky, but to sound, it's just we went out every day. And I do think we were locked into the idea of like focusing on the process and just going out every day and being like, we want to be the best version of what we can be every single time we take the field, every single time we have an opportunity to grow ourselves as a program. And we just had this belief that like everyone was chasing us and we would just keep widening the gap. And so, in full disclosure, we never once scouted in my entire college career. I didn't know anything about an opposition team other than what maybe I remember from a year before, or maybe you've read in a newspaper, which we were also told, don't read into the media and everything, stay away from it. So I look at that and I'm like, we went out there every day and we're like, we've just got to be the better team on the day. And we believed in ourselves with that. So I think it was a lot of that was infused by the coaches. And we worked with Jerry Lynch, a phenomenal, sports psychologist and just culture guy. And I think developer of team and the idea of connectedness. And that drove us, that fueled us, and that led us. And then you have Gary Gate, one of the best minds in the game, teaching you skill, teaching you strategy, and every day getting to work with him and every day him saying, okay, you've got that down. Now let me raise the bar a little bit higher. And can you try this? And can you do this? Didn't stray away from, pushing the boundaries. And I think that ended up being just that perfect combination. And year in, year out, we took that challenge and said, okay, new team, new mix. Let's go at it again. Let's let the rest of the country chase us. So easy to sit here now and say that, but again, Cindy Timshaw, I say, is the best maestro in the game. She put together the right combination of people, coaches, staff, the right mentality. We never got complacent and we never let expectation get the better of us or outside pressure or we never let anyone else's narrative run the show for us. We were in control of that from day one. So I think she's the ultimate puppeteer and she certainly knows what she's doing. She may act aloof sometimes, but that she is brilliant. She has one of the best minds in the game.
I've gotten to know Cindy the last couple of years, and I don't think I've come across many people that watch as much lacrosse as her so quickly to like her own games, even finishing, to where I'm like, it's so impressive. And a lot of what you were just saying there, like there's so many things that come to mind for me that I'd love to ask about and hear about. But one thing that comes up is, it just seems like you're talking about this perfect storm of the mental approach, which again, I'd have to imagine was before its time at the time. Like now everyone talks about the process and the approach, but what you guys were doing was clearly something different and elevated. You have, again, another one of the best players of all time influencing on the offensive end and pushing boundaries. And Gary's talked about that on here before. He's like always trying to find the edge, like whether it was the sticks, the stringing, the scheme. But you yourself, like you were playing this modern style game with, the face dodges and the sidearm passes and wraparound, like, how did that come about for you? Like, how did you get that confidence to play your game and not be limited by maybe what the game should look like at the time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I go back to my roots in Australia. I grew up, not necessarily having that traditional idea of this is what the women's game looks like, this is what the men's game looks like. I think Australia didn't have that. We were pushing boundaries. You had players doing all kinds of crazy stuff. On the women's side, and on the men's side, there weren't a ton. On the women's side, there wasn't a ton of people to look up to. I know we had the Gary Gate, Paul Gate poster, the infamous, Gary doing the air gate around the goal with Paul, lounging in the goal. And we'd go out and me and my sister would like reenact, trying to do that stuff. Knowing we couldn't necessarily do it on the field in a women's game, but that's the stuff we would practice because that's the stuff that we're seeing. I was never of the opinion that that's something for the guys game and that's something for the girls game. And I think that is something that I really draw inspiration from is I would watch, like I said, Mark Mangan on a wall doing crazy stick work. He would walk away and I'd be like, let me try that with my women's stick. And then I get to Maryland and you've got Gary who's like, do all this crazy stuff. And then it was like him encouraging and pushing us, think up your own stuff. So a lot of it's emulation. And I'm a firm believer that like, if you can see other people doing it, it's, the Charlotte North effect of recent time. It's like, there's been so many great players that you now see it and then you ad lib from that a little bit. And that's where the next great player comes from and great talent comes from. And so I think mine was a combination of watching all these great plays and then having a coach like Gary, who's like, there are no boundaries. There's no limits. Just because you maybe haven't seen it in women's lacrosse yet doesn't mean you can't be the first one to go out there and try to do it. So I think it's, not being shackled in the game. And then it's being like, ad-libbing, having the confidence, having the competence to go out there and attempt stuff and be like, I might fail, I might look ridiculous, but I'm going to give it a crack and see if it works. So that was getting to the point in our game. The first behind the back I threw, I remember it was like people were going crazy. And now you see it in a game like it's as much of a pass. It's not special to anyone anymore. And that's the beauty of sports, the evolution and how far we come and the innovation. And I do think Gary Gate did a great job in the women's game at the University of Maryland of encouraging and pushing the tempo of that, getting outside the box and challenging the normal view of a women's lacrosse player, open the door, close the door, playing in a very specific style. And, I was just lucky that I came in from a place like Australia where, I'm trying to do all that stuff anyway. So again, it just is timing being right, I think.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty natural fit from the way you're describing, more of a free flow playing style coming from Australia, getting to Maryland, getting to play for Gary Gate, who is probably one of the most and foremost free flowing players of that time period and maybe any time period to this point. I'm wondering, through that time as a player at Maryland, did you start to feel like as you graduated, you might want to get into coaching because of those coaches, or how did you get into coaching after graduation?
Yeah, a funny story. I actually, I have always loved coaching. One of the things in Australia too is like you start as soon as you get out of an age group, you're expected to go back and coach the younger age group. So it wasn't a choice for me. I had always coached, and I really, really enjoyed it. Playing and going through what I did. I loved my experience at Maryland, but I was like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to break out of the lacrosse world. I'm going to, I looked at real estate. I looked at a bunch of different things. I thought at one point I wanted to be a sports agent, and then I realized you need to take law to do that. And that was quickly crossed off my list. Like I was all over the shop. I just thought maybe keeping in sports, but then maybe wanting to branch out. Coaching was not on my radar. Again, I had that one semester that I still had to fulfill to graduate at the University of Maryland. So I got to come on as a undergrad assistant coach, get to coach under Cindy, Gary, and Kathy Reese. So fortunate, and see the behind the scenes, which when you're a player, you have no idea what your coaches do. You don't just show up and make a practice plan and blow your whistle a couple of times of practice and roll out of there, which is maybe naively what I used to think. But you realize real quick how much extra goes into being a coach and how little of it is actually the X's and O's. And so I had that first behind the scenes kind of the seat at the table, watching those coaches and those incredible coaches do their thing. And so I think I started to fall in love with that a little bit more, about the idea of like all that goes into it to make it work. And then by the time I graduated, I couldn't imagine not giving back to that experience that I'd been so fortunate to have a part of my experience. And the thought of like lacrosse not being an everyday part of my life, that was where I started to feel that tug. So again, I was really, really lucky. I got to stay on at the University of Maryland, and Cindy kept me on there, and got to continue to my career at a place where I loved and felt so comfortable to start to kind of grow that seed of coaching experience that you need.
One thing I've loved about doing this podcast is, like, I'm not someone who really loved like history in general, but I love hearing the history of like coaching and coaching trees, and hearing, like, in lacrosse specifically, how connected everyone is. So like hearing that you got to play for and then coach with three of the most legendary coaches is really cool, to both of us. And I would love for listeners on the podcast to hear from you. What's one thing specifically that you tried to take from each of them and implement into your coaching style that you learned?
Whew, loaded one. Okay. Cindy Timshaw, I think one thing, but is, in order to be a championship team, it's not what you're doing on the field. It starts in the locker. It's what you're doing off the field. It's where everything starts and ends. The lacrosse stuff fits in there in some way, but your ability to be a team off the field will help drive that championship team. Gary, there are no limits. Push the boundaries. I think, don't handcuff your players. Teach everything you can teach, and then let them take it to the field. Give them the freedom to that with that, and as a coach, give them the reins, and let them have that feeling of confidence from you as a coach. And then Kathy Reese, the most incredible balance of being competitive and wanting to win, because there's no question she wants to win, but no one has more fun than Kathy Reese doing it. As a coach, as a player, she was the same way. She just brings so much like fun and energy and joy. And so it's like, sometimes people feel like in order to be successful, you got to be so, they look at professional and they think it's got to be, so serious and so like locked in all the time. And Kathy taught me the idea of balance, and that everything in moderation and everything sprinkled in the right combination is the secret to success.
The last one too is interesting, because when we were doing some of our, prep for the pod, and, reaching out to like, Adam and Hannah and Dana and like different people that we've spoken to.
Oh gosh, hopefully you didn't get any stories from any of them.
No, those stories, they said that those were sacred. I tried.
Okay.
But one thing that, was a theme was for you as a player, that you were able to strike this balance of being like fiery and competitive, but also making things look and seem so effortless and relaxed, and that you were so much fun to be around as a player. So clearly, like, you've had some of that too as a player. And I know that balance is really, I know, we're talking coaching now, but that's really hard for players to unlock too. Like, how do you want something so bad, you want to be the All-American, you want to win a championship, you want to be the best player on the field, but then if you grip the stick too tight, especially on offense, you're not going to be playing so free. That clearly made you great. So, I don't know if I have a question there, but like, that it's such a interesting, psychological thing in sports to assess.
Yeah, I think it's like, as a player, you got to be able to be a little bit of everything. And I do think like that's a maturity thing. I know I learned it as a coach. When I first took over Loyola, I felt like I had to separate myself, from my playing days. And I felt like I had to be, harder. I had to be tough. I had to be like in there, and like I had to show them they needed to respect me. And I think I didn't sprinkle enough of the fun and things in my early years. Like I got caught up in the idea of what is professional needs to look this way. what it needed to look and feel like. And it took me a couple years to remind myself, like, go back, like emulate those coaches and what they gave you, and then sprinkle some of your own stuff on it. That's again where you take things to the next level. So I do think it's a maturity thing. I think young coaches fall into that trap a lot. It's where, as a mentor to other coaches, I try to help them catch that before it becomes where they don't enjoy the job, or they get so stressed out. Is like finding the ability to draw from all those different things and being a little bit of a chameleon. Different teams need different things. And I think that is something as a player, sometimes you felt like you needed to be that player that brought the little bit of loose, light, fun to it. I know there's some Australian teams I was that player, and then there was some Australian teams where I felt like I needed to be a little more, the serious, let's knuckle down, let's get it done, and press in that way. And I think that's the same rings true as a coach. Every year you get a new group in, and what do they need from you? And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I think the ability for really great coaches is to be a little bit of a chameleon and be able to coach with them, not at them, to be able to figure it out, like what is that special something they might need from you, and then if you've got it, being able to deliver it even though that wasn't who you were last year as a coach, while still maintaining consistency. And so it is a hard thing to do, but I think balance is key, and that balance sways in every year in a lot of different directions. And I think it's locking in and figuring out what that balance is that's required of you, and then delivering on that front, whether you're a player or a coach.
Yeah, and it's funny listening to what you're saying about what you learned from Cindy, Gary, and Kathy, preparing for this, and Deemer, we're talking to people and getting information and reading articles about you, and the three things you said kind of come through in everything I seem to read about you. The ability to focus on the off the field piece, like your creativity and ability to inspire that, whether it's me watching YouTube highlights of you as a player, watching some of those the other day, you see all of that. And then this balance of wanting to win, but making it fun seems like to be a real theme of what players say about the teams you're on, but also how you speak about those teams. One thing I want to shift to is you getting the head coaching job at Loyola. You graduate from Maryland, you get to coach with Coach Tim Chaw at Maryland for a few years. Then you go to Denver with Kathy Reese for a few years, and I believe come back to Maryland. And that's when you get offered the Loyola job. And I have a quote here that I read that I want to read real quick. And then maybe you can elaborate on what that feeling was like when you were interviewing for the Loyola job and making that decision. And the quote is, "People always talk about this gut feeling. I walked out of that room, and that was the aha moment for me, where I was walking down the hall and Teddy Burns and I were walking together, and we heard the room erupt and start cheering. And she said, 'You've got to come here. This is the place for you.'" Do you remember what it was like making the decision to go to Loyola, and what made it feel like the right place for you?
Yeah, I do. It's actually, I can kind of get chills listening to that quote because, 18 years later and I'm still here, which is pretty rare in the sport. But I will tell you, I did not want to come to Loyola. The job, I get reached out to by a couple of alumni. I said, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm back in my alma mater. I'm coaching with my best friend, Kathy Reese. Basically, it couldn't have been more of a perfect setting. And I start getting this interest. Teddy Burns reaches out to me, the administrator at Loyola. I say, no, thank you. Joe Boylan, our athletic director at the time, one of the most incredible humans I've ever met, reaches out to me and says, will you, apply and throw your name into the hat? And I'm like, no, thank you. So I'm like, a lot of no's, and that's hard for me. I'm not a no person, but a lot of no's. And they were persistent, to say the very least. I did meet Joe Boylan, and Kathy Reese said, come have breakfast with us. We just want to talk to you about the job. If you leave that meeting and you don't want to come, then, we'll leave it there. So I'm like, I get a free meal, never turn down a free meal. So I show up, we sit around a table. They have so much great stuff to say. And I leave the breakfast and I'm like, yeah, reach back out. I'm all good. Thank you though. Appreciate it. Teddy Burns says, can I just come have a drink with me? We'll meet. I just want to talk to you about some things I missed. I'm like, I'm not one to turn away a free drink. So I go. And then after that meeting, I'm all good. I'm happy where I am. Thank you. And I appreciate all the interest. And they say, just come onto campus. Just come onto campus, and then we promise we will never bother you again. I'm like, these people are nuts. So I'm like, you know what? If you leave me alone, I'll come on. I didn't even have a resume at the time. I remember just writing something up quickly in Word to be able to bring. And as I went around, I didn't have that playing recruiting moment. And as you mentioned in that quote, I didn't have that. And people always talked about it. They were like, oh, I knew this was the place for me. After I came and I met the people and I got to be on campus and I'd kind of sit there and be like, don't get me wrong, couldn't have landed at a better place than Maryland, but I really didn't have a choice. I wasn't recruited by anyone else. I didn't get to go on the campus and experience the recruiting tour and that whole side of things. So I had it later in life, and I got on a campus, and as I'm walking around, it struck me. It was that gut feeling. It was, this is the right place for you. And so as I left there, I'm like, these players are players I could coach for, this administration, this school, this place. Um, when you know, you know, and it was right. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, is leaving Maryland, who I love and still, the most respect for, and a coach who I'm coaching with, who I couldn't have any more respect for. And then I'm about to go out on my own and try to do this thing at a new program. Like, why, if it's not broke, why try to fix it? So it was one of those really hard things. I had that gut feeling, and it ended up to be pretty true and be right for me. Stayed here for a very long time. Growing up with the furniture here. So
That story is amazing. It seems really special, and again, like to your point about having those aha moments, like I can remember that for my recruiting trip, and to hear that from the coaching perspective with where you were and where you are now is really cool. And I guess, we were in our last podcast, we were, talking to Coach Connery about, the interview process. And obviously this process probably different than most, where you were so heavily courted, and probably didn't have these elaborate recruiting plans and things to what's your vision for Loyola? Like, I'm sure you talked through some of that, but when you actually did realize, oh, this is the job I'm going to take, like, what was next? Like, where did you start to build that foundation?
yeah. And what's funny about it is I did feel like heavily courted from the administration and from the players that were there and everything else. But I would tell you, the hottest people were the alumni. They didn't want to terp in coaching a Loyola program that had been in, Loyola blood for the entire time. And I get that and I respect that. And it's one of the things I loved the most about it, was I had to fight to earn their respect in terms of loyalty, in terms of like, I am not going to leave this program. I'm in it with you now. But they were the toughest cookies to crack. And, it took me a long time. And to this day, those connections and building those relationships with the alumni that I did not coach. Loyola has one of the greatest storied histories and traditions. And obviously with Diane Jeppy Akins, I never came to Loyola with any intention to try to take over what she did, but I wanted to make sure that I continued to infuse this program and like breathe life into the lessons and what she stood for and what she was all about, and to continue her legacy in that way, and to always keep her at the forefront of the program. I know I'm not sitting here today if, Diane didn't end up having to struggle with brain cancer and then unfortunately losing her life. She's such a big part of this program and still will be. She's the nucleus of it. KJ, so amazing and such an integral part, and being from the Baltimore area and still so around, like, her respect of the program was something like I wanted to earn, and I wanted her to feel proud of us and what we're doing. So I think coming in, first and foremost, it was build the connections and the relationships and try to make sure that, one, I was able to focus in on the things off the bat on the field that I knew that like I felt strongly that I was good at. So teaching skill and being able to impart that side of the game and just dropping as much knowledge as I could to those players, and really trying to help them fall in love with that process of practicing and getting good, and then building the chemistry within the team. That was where I locked my initial focus in. And then, surrounding myself by people that would enable me to be my best version of myself and they could help in the areas where I knew I wasn't going to be as strong. And, Teddy Burns is my administrator. I had never dealt with budgets and never dealt with all that side of it. And Kathy's great at that stuff. And I never touched a finger to any of it and was like, holy smokes, this is a lot. But I had the right people surrounding me and people who pushed and enabled me to do what I thought I could do the best to progress this program, hanging on to the past, but looking to the future and taking us to the future.
Hey everyone, Matt here. We wanted to take a quick second to pause and talk about our SCL online coaches community. We started the community because we're obsessed with coaching and with learning from people who've shaped the game. Coaches have had a huge impact on both Deemer and myself, and building a place where we could hear from top college coaches and apply their ideas right away felt like the obvious next step. The webinars, the drills, the teaching frameworks, they've helped us coach with more clarity, and they've become a great resource for full staffs who want to stay aligned. If you want something that keeps you sharp throughout the year, you can look at firstclasslax.com/community. That's firstclasslax.com/community, or you can find the link in our description below. Now back to our conversation. One of the cool things about these podcasts too is you mentioned this earlier, you start to understand how much really goes into coaching. As a player, I used to think, hey, they just draw up the drills, we go out to practice, they show us some film, and that's the coaching job. But you talked about it, like such an important piece is the off-field piece. And we want to circle back to that, but I am curious, you talk about what you felt most comfortable with on the field, teaching skill. And there's a lot of different ways people do that, whether it's very like fundamental based or very creativity based. And then there's all these lines in between. I'm wondering, as you get to Loyola and you're thinking about what are the skills that I want to make sure our players have on the field, what those were at the time, and maybe if those have evolved or what they are today.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a fundamental 3 things for me as a coach that I still to this day talk to our players about before every game. And if we're hitting these 3 things, then that's what I'm looking for. And one is going out and competing at your all, giving your all and competing. You play a sport. And in that 60 minutes or for that 2-hour practice, you're out there being a lacrosse player. So be the best version of that you can be. In that moment, I tell my players this all the time. For this next, 2 hours of practice, you're not a student. You're not in the classroom. You can't take your exam. Leave it there. You're a lacrosse player. So you need to try to be the best at, whatever is being asked of you in that moment, shooting goals, stopping people on defense. So really like being able to lock in and compete, just going all out, letting go of the fear of failure, letting go of all the things that might hold you back from being able to just put your best foot forward. That relentlessness, like I'm a big like grit, white line fever, whistle goes, and like I want to win. And if you're out there doing something, it's not the be all and end all, but it's important in that moment while you're playing. It is the most important thing because that's what you're trying to do. So competing is huge for me, being able to be a relentless competitor. 2 is having fun while you're doing it. Nothing is worse than if you're running through the motions or you're not enjoying it. Being able to find the fun in even the mundane and the boring, but finding the fun because of what it means to the people around you. And the 3rd and the most important for me is connecting. Connecting with your teammates, building that connection, finding that chemistry. We're a team sport. You didn't choose, tennis. You didn't choose golf. You chose to be a team sport. So like the chemistry and the connection off the field, they're the 3 most important things. So for me, trying to find a way to coach those into every skill drill, whether it's on the field, off the field, finding a way to help motivate and inspire and empower our players to hit those 3 things every day they step out there.
It reminds me of what you said about Cindy earlier, where, if you don't have like the team in the locker room, you're not going to win, that is a core thing. So like, if you have these 3 things, the actual execution of certain fundamental skills, 1, is either improved, or 2, you overcome those things because you have this foundation set. And, it kind of, I want to flip it around. Is there anything from let's just say offensive skill perspective in today's game where you think young players overvalue or over index and spend too much time on versus maybe, hey, like if you if you actually valued the competition more, the things that you mentioned, you'd be in a good spot. You just, maybe they don't know it. Like, is there anything that you think they're caring about too much that's not returning a lot for them?
Yeah, I don't know if this is fully going to answer your question, but I do. This is where my head goes when you ask that question. I think players develop like IQ and understanding and a read. And I'm a pretty stubborn coach. I think there's most things I can teach players. There's very little on a lacrosse field that I'm like, I don't think I can teach. But getting in your head and like truly helping you like have the vision and the understanding of the flow of the game, I can help you with it. But if you don't have it innately, it is a very tough thing to teach, that IQ piece. And again, we're coaches, so we should be able to teach IQ. But IQ, there is an innate nature behind the best players in the world and what they do and the way in which they handle their craft versus players that are just so powerful or skilled or explosive or really good at one thing. IQ players open up a game. And I think a lot of players are so hyper specialized in what they're doing and in their training that they're not opening up this idea of like reading and understanding things. And I look at it, I think I drew a lot of that from different sports, and playing so many different sports and not specializing in just lacrosse all the way up until I got to college. And so, whether it's going out on a field and, I say this to my players all the time, they go out, they'll take a bucket of balls. It's like, I'm working my butt off. I shot 100 balls before practice. And it's like, are you growing around that? Like, you can dodge a pole and you look phenomenal at it, but how about when the defender comes live and you got to read their footing and how they're moving? Like, do you have that side of it? So I think there is like this like training that's going into it, which is like that specialized skill training, and it's great and it has a place, and certainly repetition is huge, but I think sometimes like not evolving it bigger to where you're getting that IQ and that read side of it. And again, different sports, watching different sports, watching different plays and how it all involves and like process of thinking. I think a lot of players miss that. And so I don't know if that fully answers your question in terms of like, what are they missing in terms of it? But I think specializing too early on one aspect of the game or on the sport itself too early, I think is a big problem these days.
I would just add to that because it is something that I become really passionate about. Like, probably 8 years ago when we started doing what we were doing, doing skill training, shooting, dodging, I'm like, hey, this is some of the positional stuff that I got in college that I felt like really took my game to the next level. And so I was like, if I got this in high school or even younger, like a dose of it, it would have been really impactful. I wish I learned some of these things earlier. In the 8 years since we've started, I think you've seen a massive shift into training, not just in lacrosse, but every sport, to where instead of having like one extra training a week and some practice and then doing your own stuff in between, like we're seeing some kids in some areas doing 3 and 4 trainings a week with multiple people. And then you have your practices. And so you've eliminated all your extra time to go out in the backyard and create. Everyone's, lamenting about not playing multiple sports, but they're also removing their time to play multiple sports and putting less emphasis on it. And so it just, to your point, like I think players are coming in like overcoached in some ways. And then 3 years, 2 years, like you might be a junior in college and you couldn't unlearn or get that innate ability in enough time, and another player is surpassing you. So it's like, it's this very interesting dynamic that I enjoyed talking about because I think it touches on like what you're saying is either missing or what players need to focus on more.
And that backyard lacrosse that you talked about. I mean, some of my fondest memories are, with my siblings, my brother Cam, my sister Trish, and us just like goofing around out there, seeing how many catches we get in a row when we were young, not going in till the sun went down and trying to better ourselves. But like, it was just fun. and we enjoyed it, and we'd try all kinds of crazy different stuff out there. And like, backyard lacrosse, you hear it. I remember doing clinics with the pals, or, the Gates, or whoever it is. Like, everyone you talk to who was really successful had an element of that. And they're the players whose names still exist out there as transforming the game and the sport. And so much of that was done in a setting that wasn't, wasn't so formalized. And I think there is something to that. But just that idea of IQ growing out of different experiences in different sports. And again, I think it's like, a quarterback in football, but like getting different reads and seeing different things. You're always going to hear the best players coming out, played multiple different, probably could have picked up any different sport and have pursued it and taken it on, and being phenomenal at it. I mean, you look at Pat Spencer, he probably could go basic. He could probably go any sport next and still crush it. Golf, you give him a piece of equipment and that guy could master anything. And I think the really great athletes can do that. And I think it comes from a place of just truly understanding the sport or whatever setting you're in, but understanding your body and physical mechanics of how to use your body to make yourself successful.
And I think the one of the themes that keeps coming out is this word fun, right? And I think that's the other thing with multiple sports is players don't always realize that they're doing work because they're having fun switching from season to season, and they're naturally pursuing their interests. And you said like your three things for practice: competing, have fun, and connecting. I totally agree, because when you can make practice fun, you don't have to coach effort, right? It kind of just emerges naturally. As a coach, and maybe as a coach listening, I think sometimes it can be hard to figure out how to turn your practices into fun without getting whimsical, if you will, and still keeping competition and all of that. Do you have any tips on how to make practice fun while keeping that competitive spirit you want?
Yeah, I think we always whenever we take a drill, we're like, what is the intent and the purpose of the drill? And for us, it's like, we coach student athletes out here, so their time is precious. So I'm not trying to just keep them out there for 2 hours and doing things that are irrelevant. I know I could play power finesse or whatever. They probably have a great time. They'd enjoy it a lot, but like, does it serve a purpose for what we need for that day? I think when your players have an innate trust in you, and I think all great teams move at the speed of trust, but when your players trust you, and we can be like, okay, this is what we're looking for in this drill, and they know, they can laugh about something, but whatever, but the intention is that they're being competitive in it. So we start from a place of like, what do we want to get out of the drill? And then we work within that. Like, we will sometimes draw up a drill talking as a coaching staff, and we'll draw it up and we're like, that is going to be torture. That is going to just be no fun. So like, how can we ad lib to it? Still getting the same thing out of it, but make it that we know, and we've walked in their shoes, so we know those drills. How can we like change it up a little bit where it is fun? What we've found, we have the kind of athlete that they have the most fun when we're competing, when we're counting scores and reps, when we're, there's a winner and a loser. But truthfully, they want that in our thing. So it's like listening and figuring that out, I think, for your team, what you can get a read of what is fun for them, and then just trying to find a way to like insert that in with the intention behind what you're trying to get out of a drill. I just heard recently someone saying, and this is what I fell victim to, I think, in early ages of coaching, is like, you're not wrestling with them as a coach, but you're dancing with them as a coach. And I think that's a great way to look at it. You're with them. I'm with you on this. And like, I don't want the drill to be boring. I want you to get something out of it, but I also want you to enjoy it. And I also want you to have the right intention behind what you're doing when you're out there.
That's an awesome phrase. I've never heard that before, and I'll be reusing that. But what you're saying there about the drill and the purpose and making it fun, I want to zoom out, because I think it's a microcosm of my overall impression of your program. And so like, one thing I've been thinking about with doing this podcast with you is, I feel like, one, you've had so many players come through the ranks that have loved their experience, have loved playing for you and your staff. Clearly, a lot of players who are then inspired to become coaches. Beyond even that approach you just mentioned, like, how do you think about like not just culture, but developing the player experience? And why do you think you've had success in that realm?
Yeah, it's going to sound a little cliche, but people always say, no one knows how much you know until they know you care. And I do think that has been at the forefront of everything I've done at Loyola, and I follow that with intention. I think our players trust us. I am so fortunate, to be on a sideline alongside Dana Dobie, Caroline Hager, and now Georgia Latch, as well as all the other coaches that have come through in our time. They're the best, and I think we have a lot of fun coaching together. I want to be successful as a coach, and I really look at our president Terry Sawyer recently. I was at a dinner and he said, "Success is nice, success is great, but success is immediate." If you're looking for that as a coach, it's that's your win-loss record in the season, or did you win or lose this game? And it's success is great, but something that means more is being significant. And I think that is what's hard as a coach is like what you're doing now. And if you're just looking at your wins and losses and your successes, that can be a really lonely road in a season where you're struggling or you're not getting those wins. It's not that your team's not trying. It's not that there's not talent. It's just that you're not winning those games. Sometimes they don't fall your way. So if you put all your eggs in that basket of success, but the hard part is for us as coaches, like, I don't know what kind of job I'm doing until 20 years down the road when hopefully people, still remember you as a coach and they still are saying, you had an impact on my life and these are the ways in which you did it. So, I think it's great. We have so many coaches get into coaching because I know I got into coaching because I wanted to give back the experience I had and it was a good one. So I am hoping our 22 active coaches that are out there from Loyola that we've had the opportunity are doing that for the same reason, and I believe they are. And then I believe, you know, that we have to make it look like it's a fun job. Otherwise, no one there wants to do it. I genuinely love the fact that I get to be a college lacrosse coach. I feel so fortunate, and I'm so incredibly grateful that I get to do this as a career. I cannot do it at home. There's not even an option to do this at home in Australia. So I am certainly grateful every day that this is a profession and I get paid to show up every day to do something that I love. I get to merge my passion with my career, and I know so few people in life get to do that. So I don't lose sight of that. And I think that is what I want to give to our players every day. That's not to say like I don't ever get an angry at a practice or, off the field, things don't go wrong. Like no program is perfect, but I think it's being able to work through that. And again, that's that coaching with them. And your players just feeling like you got their back and you're on their side. I think we're a very loyal coaching staff in that right way. And we say it all the time. If you come in here, you're going to run through a brick wall for us. We are the coaches for you because we will run through brick walls for you too.
Well, to that point we mentioned earlier, it seems like that is the impression of you in the Loyola program from alumni and people that have coached with you. And this whole, you've talked about you don't know until later. So you kind of have to believe something and have a stance on what you think will work. And you follow that and you hope it works later, but you have enough trust in yourself. I saw a line and that I believe you said, I'll paraphrase it, that you believe this generation can handle more than people think. And I'm wondering what you mean by that as you think about how to coach players nowadays.
Yeah, I think there's this perception that we've got to be, soft. And we heard the whole generation of, it's the positive. You got to give them positive, positive. Then you can give them some feedback and positive, positive, positive. And I'm like, we haven't found that to ring true with any of these athletes. They come in and if they know you want and your intention is there and they trust that you want what's best for them, then there is buy-in there. And, we've worked with, a company leading teams in Australia back with one of our Australian programs. And he always said, there is never criticism in those circumstances. There is feedback. There is only communication and feedback. It's never criticism. And when your players know that when you're coaching them, that it's coming from that, love tough, not tough love, like that's the essence of it. Is I do think like first you got to get them on your side. And then I think like they can handle a lot. Like they want and they crave, a lot of our players at Loyola, and I can only speak from my experience, but our players crave having to work and earn our coaching praise and respect. I think our players crave and like want to earn when you give them that compliment out on the field, and they don't look at that feedback when you're coaching them in every other way. They're looking at like, okay, Jen said this and she got on me for this. Like I make that adjustment. I got to be better. There's that illusion that like professional sports can do it. Well, why can they do it? But this group couldn't handle it if we're asking them to go on and that to be their next step. So I just feel like, I do think that mental health is important. I think all those things. And I do think like just being in tune with it all and figuring out every single player is going to be different. You cannot look at it from one cookie cutter approach. No one player in my locker room right now sitting next to each other in a locker needs the same thing for me or wants the same thing for me. So the quicker I can get to understand and learn them as people and what motivates them and what pushes them and how to go about doing that, that's where I do think, you don't have to hold back from having those standards, but help them create those standards with you, and then you can hold them accountable. And I think this generation, they are very accountable. You've just got to put those parameters out there for them and let them know it's important. Show the way.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes, and I've experienced this with, like a family member over time, where sometimes like, I think there's an older generation that can just project their thoughts onto the younger generation, where maybe it's, oh, this generation doesn't work hard. This generation can't take the hard coaching. Like stuff is clearly changing, but to your point, it doesn't mean that for even high performing teams that it's changing. It might be changing in some of the other realms of the world, and as schools shift and stuff, but it's and then your point about treating them like individuals, like no person's the same. When I was in my first year at USC, it was my first time coaching college team and first time coaching a women's team. The best advice I felt like I got was from Coach Kadani, who was the USC soccer coach at the time, coaching the women's team. And he just said, treat every player like an individual, and if you can do that and you can like care for them, he's like, I think it will work out. It will unfold. And I was like, wow, I think that's how some of my coaches in college were, but it wasn't so explicit. But I think when you do it, when you act it, when you live it, I think really good things come from that.
And I'm not saying this isn't a different generation. This is for sure a different generation. And, we deal with a lot of different things as a coaching staff and technology, and we try to use that. And, we try to stay current so that we can relate on that level, because there are different things, like you said. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying it's not a different generation at all. It is the environment they're in is exceptionally different than what I grew up in. I'm very glad I came through when I did with what I did. But it's finding those things and how can we use them in a positive way and as a tool in teaching and coaching and everything else. How can we get on their level a little bit with that, rather than being like, I don't get it, I'm not trying to buy in. We are coaches in this day and age and in this time, so we have to adapt. But I just really do think I have players come into my office and they're like, be tough on me. If you see me and I'm not doing something right, like I want you to yell at me. That's what I need. And I just think that there is this perception that we've got to handle them with kitty gloves. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. One of my mentors always said, great players want to be coached. They want the feedback. I want to shift gears here as we're starting to wind down on time. Again, it was awesome hearing about some of your upbringing in the game, your view, your perspective. Would love to hear about, the state of the women's game, what you see, what you see in the rules, and just what's your view, what's your view on the game? Is there anything holding the game back? I loved hearing you talk earlier about like reducing limits and boundaries. Where do you see, the game in 2026?
Explosive time for women's lacrosse. We are at one of the most exciting kind of pinnacles It's like we're like bouncing on the diving board and we're about to take off and it's like, what's next? But we're at a really exciting time. And I also think that makes it a really, really important time because I think we have to get some things right for this to continue to build that traction and move in the right direction. Obviously, with the Olympics coming up, with all of these things, in our favor, rules, we consistently over time have been a sport that is very difficult to understand to a non-fan, to even coaches sometimes, even officials, even players, right? Like, I think we need to get to a place where our game is a little more manageable for the officials. I think we make it so incredibly difficult for them to officiate a game. And if it's hard to officiate a game because the rules are so gray and not more black and white, I know not all can be, but if we can get it to a more black and white kind of phase, if we can get it to a place where someone who's not a fan of the game can come and just kind of watch a couple minutes and start to understand the cadence and the flow of the game and get it, then exciting things start to happen with your, media coverage, with picking things up. But we've got the right personalities, the right people in the game. We got generational talent with people like Chloe Humphrey and some of these players still in college for the next 3 years that are going to, help the game explode. And I do think the rules, we're just stuck in this phase where we're stuck in the mud and we got to make sure that we unshackle ourselves so that we can let this game take off. And I think there's a lot of people looking to make that happen. There are so many different versions of the game and things going out, like at high school to college. And I know that's a white paper project with the IWLCA is let's try to just see what we can do to make women's lacrosse just as exciting as it can possibly be and brand it in a way and package it in a way that is ready for the explosive kind of powder keg of an opportunity that's about to be presented to us. So I'd say the rules in a lot of it. I think we've got all the right storytelling. I'd love to see more media coverage. I think always that's what helps you become more mainstream. I think we're in a place where, the 99ers soccer team kind of was like, I think we're there now in women's lacrosse. The Olympics is going to help progress that even further. We've got, like I said, great personalities and great parts of it. I think we've just got to make the game more accessible is another thing. And I think the rules do that too. We got to spread the game. We got to get more players with sticks in their hands. We got to make it that, it's not cost isn't precluding someone from grabbing a stick and joining, all these club teams and things. Like it can be really dissuasive to a kid starting out if they can't afford to go to a lot of these different showcases or camps or clinics or play for a club team to get the exposure. So we've got to find ways to make it more accessible and, for players to be able to play regardless of whatever experience might be stopping them.
It's been cool for me. I have learned so much about the women's game kind of this last 6 or 7 years working with Deemer in first class. And I think the part I noticed, I grew up playing basketball. Whenever we get to work with the women's players at our events, to me, the game just resembles that so much more than even the men's game. And I thought there was a ton of translation there. And just the lack of equipment, the ability, there's not long poles and short poles. There's not, a lot of more players kind of bleed between positions, where in the men's game you're seeing now, the limitation is a lot of players are specializing early. So you kind of have, it's almost like kickers in football where some players are not even developing the field skills, where you see like some face-off guys and some defenders start to play so early that they never really develop these like generalized lacrosse skills that anybody playing that backyard version of lacrosse of just catching, throwing, dodging, shooting. I mean, some players might not have ever really worked on shooting before because they start playing defense right away.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think, there are these different versions of lacrosse. I think one of the problems we're in right now is you got a lot of people who are really single-minded, like this is the best version and like all these other versions, the reality of it is, we have different disciplines for certain reasons, right? The Olympics, we couldn't take a full field team. The two men's and women's game are too different. The financial restraints to that, we would never have got Olympic recommendation or got through to the Olympics if we tried to push the field sport. So we go with this sixes variation, it is a different discipline. But I think they can all coexist. We just got to support them more and look at it from the bigger picture. Like step back and look at women's lacrosse, and it's an exciting time rather than trying to fight all the different versions and things that are out there. Like, how can we support each other? And how can we be that conduit to the next thing? And, college lacrosse has a really big role in that, in pushing those players through to want to be elite players at the next level, at the national level. And then now there is this really cool concept of, now you're a national player, you're playing in your World Cup, but like you can go to an Olympics and you can represent your country on a world stage where all these other sports are playing, and the exposure that we're going to get for that. So I just think there's a way for us to support all the things going on rather than fight them. And for us to all be fans of the sport, we're always going to be able to make improvements and changes, but like, how can we help take what we've got now and help it move forward and progress? Because we need progression. We're going to need to continue to progress, and we need, thinkers, think tank that shoot it out into, and say like, how about this? And so I think women's lacrosse, we are very open to all of that. And we're at an exciting time. As I mentioned, it's all about to take off. So it's just fine tuning all the little bits and pieces. I think in college lacrosse, the rules, we can be better. And the game itself is certainly moving at a speed that is, I mean, like Cindy, nothing excites me more than, you would think with how much scouting film we watch and how many games we have to be at, and we're out there practicing. Now, I love nothing more than putting on the TV and seeing lacrosse and watching lacrosse games. And I get that lacrosse hangover when season ends. It's like, what am I going to do now? So, again, then just flipping it and getting excited now that the PLL, the WLL, they're the best players in the world are going to be playing in this professional league, and how neat for the women that they're going to have another avenue now to have another shot, another vehicle, another platform to try to get this pro game off the ground. So a lot of great stuff happening. And I just think it takes the support of people, and we can go in a great direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things with that like pop in my head, but I think your point about the disciplines, and I do think if people spent more time supporting the disciplines and pulling out the positives of how they would impact not just player development, but also benefit the other disciplines, I think people can see there's so much core to lacrosse concepts that translate into all these, in the men's, everyone talks about like the box field, hybrid, and like how that has come together. In women's, like, sixes is again become a really positive impact. And now the women's box is like really starting to take off. And everyone I've talked to that's played in that has loved that. And so if we're hearing like high level players are enjoying these multiple experiences, and clearly these players in college and players that are recently graduating are continuing to push boundaries like you did, I think everyone needs to rally around supporting that and, continuing to keep the different games safe and be thoughtful around player safety, but also continue to try to just give the platforms for whatever version of these games it is that, hey, like, let's support that and put fuel on the fire, because we all love watching lacrosse and enjoying lacrosse, period, regardless of the discipline.
Yeah, Jen, as we wrap up here, just a couple final questions and kind of around, you've talked about, I love the quote, significance over success, right? Being significant as a coach is much more than wins and losses. And I want to kind of hit on legacy and impact a little bit here. And I'm curious for you, is there a part of your career that you're most proud of that maybe people don't talk about as much?
I don't think it talked about much anymore, I don't think, I mean, I would just say my club experience growing up at home, maybe not like, but just what I did in Australia and what I was able to be a part of in Australia prior to coming to the States. I feel like people, like, if people draw or talk about my career, it's quite often about what I've done in America. And I feel like one of the things I'm most proud about is like what I did boots on the ground in Australia and the opportunities to continue to coach. I'm such a proud person and I love my country. And, I I have loved the experiences I've had with Australia, and I feel like, it's kind of like I started my career at the University of Maryland when really like that grassroots, the stuff I did at the Brighton Lacrosse Club, playing for my state at home, that's what built me. That was my blueprint of how I and how I grew up. So I'd say that's something I'm most proud of that probably doesn't get talked about much, but I'm okay with not getting talked about much. Period. Full stop. End it there.
No, I mean, that was something that we wanted to ask about too, is like just, the importance and meaning to you about continuing to impact Australia lacrosse. Like, what does that look like? We were talking about before the call how hard it is to get back there. The frequency of getting back there and traveling is fewer and farther between for you, but you certainly continued to stay involved, playing, coaching, et cetera, over the years. Like, what does that look like for you for years to come, and how you want to continue to impact the game there?
Yeah, like I said, I don't have an opportunity to go home and coach for a profession, but my ability to go back and still be present. I think that's the biggest thing. I think Hannah Nelson, Sonia LaMonica, whenever we go back, like just getting back in and making sure that we're around it and supporting it and being a part of any form of growth that we can help with. Um, it quite often is, obviously you need boots on the ground there to be able to do that. But I think, however I can continue to impact Australian lacrosse, like it'll always have my heart. I'll always put anything I can into any opportunity I get. Unfortunately that's not going to be this coming Olympics, but down the road, I'm really hopeful that I might get an opportunity. And I think the coolest part for me is getting to do that with my Australian people. I got to coach the under-19 Australian team with Stacey Morlang, one of my greatest friends and players I got to play for Australia with, and we got to do that together. And my sister, I've got to coach with her on the sidelines of a bunch of Australian teams, and she's just the best. And so to be able to go back home and to think about down the road, selfishly getting the opportunity to coach with those people that I just love coaching with, and getting to do that for Australia. But then giving back however I possibly can to the youth, to my club, to anyone, that's something that will always remain really important to me. So, whenever I can get back, making sure, as much as I don't want to, still picking up a stick and being able to go out there. I want to be a break. I want to get on the beach and enjoy my vacation. But it's like, now's your time. You're back. Be present. Be around it, and give back as much as I can.
Yeah, that's a great message. And Jen, with that, we just want to thank you again for the time today. It was really a joy getting to hear about your journey, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years since I first got started in the women's game, and it's really amazing all you've done for the sport. So thank you for that, and wishing you guys the best this spring.
Thanks so much, Deemer. And I don't usually get on these because I cop so much flack from home about my lack of Australian accent. So anything that's recorded or, can go live or viral, try to stray away from. But no, I really appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing. I love these segments. It's awesome.
Oh, we appreciate it, Jen. We appreciate your time, and best of luck preparing for the season.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.